morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on optimizing AEC collaboration and centralizing storage, utilizing Panzura as a solution. We're very excited about the lineup that we have today. I think you're going to appreciate it as well, and about the topic. I'll begin by saying that as a VAR that is focused on solutions for the building and infrastructure industries, we see cloud storage and cloud collaboration as the next logical step for our clients to address. Today, doesn't matter what size firm you have, the three biggest challenges you have sometimes, it feels that way sometimes, is data, data, and more data. And Panzura is really a perfect fit for our clientele to address these challenges. First of all, Panzura addresses the typical challenges of today's growing firm. Disaster recovery, secure low-cost backup, archiving, to name a few of the challenges with data. But it also addresses very elegantly issues such as latency that firms with multiple sites need to address to collaborate in large files. So if you need to optimize data storage management, distribution in the cloud, or your goal is to achieve seamless, better cross-site CAD and BIM collaboration, establish a disaster recovery plan, this is where Panzura comes in as a fantastic solution. So I'll be introducing the panelists, a couple of the panelists today shortly. Before I do that, I just want to say a couple of words about Microsol Resources, about my firm and my team, and why we feel that we are the kind of partner that you want to work with when addressing your CAD and BIM challenges. A number of things that we do for our clients, we provide them, and a lot of people know us for this, for their CAD and their BIM software. That's the basics of what we do. But we also obviously provide technical support to our clients, offer a variety of consulting services, assist customers with BIM implementation and customization, and CAD management is still an issue that many firms have to deal with, and we work with them on this. Of course, we have classroom training. We have 3 offices, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. In each office, we have classrooms for 9 or 10 people, and we go on site. We assist your firm with staffing when you need to augment your team. This is the latest of our passions, and we're very good at it, assisting firms with 3D printers. And when a firm is now ready to acquire their own 3D printer, we will do it as a service. And so we really specialize in providing technology solutions to the building and infrastructure industries, and that is where we come in as a Panzura partner. It is a technology solution that specifically solves the issues of our clients. So just to name a few of the industries we support, here you see we are an Autodesk Platinum partner. I just want to make sure everybody knows that. That's the highest level of partnership one can have. This 25 years, it's actually more like 30, but Autodesk doesn't have a logo for 30 years, so we still have the logo for 25 years. And so we pride ourselves in being a partner for with our clients, more than just a provider of solutions. And so whether it's software or training or staffing or 3D printing, we feel we are your technology partner. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to our first speaker. I've learned this a long time ago. Our clients want to hear about solutions from the provider of the solutions, and we have 2 people from Panzura that will speak to you about the Panzura solution. But before that, we thought it would be important for you to hear from a person that is a year ago would have been sitting in a webinar, maybe, I don't know, a year, 2 years ago, but he's done his research, he looked around, and he made a decision. Dan Gallivan is Director of IT at Payette. Payette is a large firm, number 289 in the ENR list, a firm with 150 employees out of a large office in Boston. Dan is the director of IT, and he has made the decision and invested in Panzura. We invited him to speak today because, among other things, he's got a very strong background in architecture and construction. He leads the technology team at Payette. He has a BS in architectural engineering from the Wentworth Institute of Technology, as a Microsoft certified professional and a Microsoft certified systems administrator. He's got all the information he needs to. He had all the information he needed to make this decision. He made it, and couldn't think of anybody better to introduce us to Panzura and how it addresses the challenges that Payette has. So Dan, if you would take it away.
That I can do. Thank you, Emilio. As Emilio just said, you know, we're dealing with a lot of the same challenges in the AEC marketplace, and I appreciate the time today for letting me share my story. One of the first things I just wanted to quickly go into a little bit is who is Payette and what do we do. So from that, Annalisa, if you want to assist, thank you. We are architects. We specialize in complex science and medical projects. We're based out of Boston. We have a global reach. We obviously working with science and medical complex spaces. We do a lot in the Boston, New England area for a lot of universities and medical schools. We currently have projects active in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa. So we've got quite a global reach. And one of the things that actually I think makes Payette a little bit more unique and different than some of the other firms, maybe of similar size or maybe of greater size, is our offices. We have everyone work out of what we call one think tank or one workshop here in Boston. This way, all of our buildings have a sort of similar touch, a similar design concept, similar in that everyone participates, from design staffs through architects, through principals, associate principals, through our building scientists. Everyone is giving input and working and analyzing particular projects. So there's a single sense of authorship that comes out in a lot of our designs, but a lot of shared knowledge that goes through all of those designs, so that we're able to actually help mentor and bring up architects through all different generations that get to work on these complex buildings together. So one of the things I just wanted to mention, as Emilio started to go through that introduction, is who am I? So Annalisa, if we can advance, thank you. I am the IT director. I lead the IT team here at Payette. Over 20 years experience working in the AEC IT marketplace. My specialty, I've been with Payette now for over 13 years. It's a very exciting firm to be with, and it's been an exciting opportunity to be here. As we were mentioning, our firm's needs can be different than other firms. As I said, a lot of firms that have multiple offices, their sharing and collaboration of data could be different. They might be similar size to what we are, but they're going to be spread out maybe geographically across multiple cities, states, or regions throughout the world. We're all unique in some ways, but in some ways we're all very similar in dealing with the same types of data. So one of the first things you want to do as you start to go through, and we'll advance here in sort of our thought, is moving into what I call our discovery phases. This is where you really want to take a deep dive into your data and seeing what it is that you have as part of your data that exists in your world today. And Elisa, if we want to jump ahead, please. Thank you. So one of the things you'll do is start to discover your data. And as Emilio just mentioned a short time ago, data, and more data. We're discovering and experiencing the similar challenges in the AEC field. It's the challenges around our data. We have ever-growing amounts of data. and ever-growing amounts of data that need to be shared across project teams, maybe cities, offices, regions, or globally, as we're mentioning with some of our particular projects that we have going on. That data that we have is only growing larger and larger in its types. So we actually face this ever demand on sort of juggling the data around. One of the other challenges that we see are a lot of projects can go on for a long time. We're in situations where projects will have a certain lifetime. We find our particular project type has maybe a average life of about 3.5 years of design through construction. Even though everything's being done, nowadays with pre-construction and sort of fast track and trying to get buildings done quickly, and maybe if you're more of a developer-driven firm, your data, or maybe you're faster in sort of your timeline of your projects. But what we're finding is that we're dealing with similar types of data, and it's only growing larger, as you mentioned. We're seeing everything from point clouds and our building models. We have laser scans, and we have city and site scans that are going on, and sometimes including vegetation. It's file data that's only growing larger and larger. We're feeling the same pain points rather, about trying to either share this data, and as a particular project moves on, we're finding that there's also a lot of record copies of data. We need to know what we transmitted on a particular day, or how a site looked on a particular time of the year, or maybe what was in that field report. So we're seeing an ever-growing exponential rate of this data growth, whether it's images and PDFs, or maybe movie files that are actually being recorded that show activity during construction. We're seeing this ever-growing amounts of data. One of the other big areas our particular firm is seeing sort of in the architectural is doing a lot of analysis, whether it be energy, daylighting, sound. There's more and more analysis that's being done during our design phases that's also producing more and more data than we ever saw before. So as this data continues to grow, one of my major pain points is, how do I continue to deal with this? And one of the big things that sort of I've been looking towards is the cloud. Panzura first came across to me as I started to hear about, just strictly in the file sharing capabilities. And for me, sometimes my pain points weren't necessarily the file sharing, it was this constant juggling of the data that I had. It was moving data maybe to a project team, if the project team was going to be maybe in a remote location working on a project, maybe in a field office for a duration, or maybe it was maybe split. There were some of them going to be in the project field, some of them were going to be back here in the main office in Boston. So it became this constant juggling of trying to get people near the data, get it closest to them. But that also came up with its own sort of headaches of maybe have what they needed with where they were at for the office. How do I back that up? There's a lot of different archiving than other issues, plus it just continues to grow. So it seemed to be this ever demand on me and my staff of just dealing with data sort of behind the scenes. So one of the big things I say for any organization is really start to take a deep dive into the discovery of the types of data that you have. And as we start to sort of move through the discovery phase, and you want to take a deep dive into the types of data that you have. You want to look closely at analyzing, what are your largest files? What are your oldest files? What are the file types that you have? And as we start to advance and move through this idea of the cloud being there for us, we can start to synthesize and start to get a deeper look into our data. And Elisa, if we just want to proceed. And one of the things that we'll start to see is that there's a lot of myths that will start to maybe scare us away from the cloud. But as we start to synthesize and look at this type of data that we have, we can start to see, hey, these are the types of common files that we have. These are some of the issues that we'll have. Maybe if you're sharing files, it becomes, well, Revit might be a file type that, there's going to be a file lock, there's going to be latency, there's going to be, hey, that can't be opened up over the cloud. But there's active data, and then there starts to become stale data. There becomes duplicate data, and then data that maybe you're tired of backing it up. It's not going to be changing. It becomes static over time. So there's many different types, and this is one of the big things I want to say is you have to start to really analyze your data and start to go through a deep look into what it is that you have. What are the different challenges that you as an organization need to factor? Is the most important thing for you the organization of the data? Is it the sharing of the data? Do you want to start to think about it on a sort of global sense for your organization? How are you arranged? How are your staff working today across project teams, maybe split cities or by regions? You need to start to think about that. So as we've discovered with the cloud, there's a lot of unknowns. One being a newer technology. People are often afraid that maybe it's going to complicate things. There's always a big threat or fear of cost. What is this going to cost me? And one of the other big things is as you start to do this, and you really, as I said, need to take a deep look into the amount of data that you have, one of the other major things becomes security. One of the awesome things I say with people is you pretty much use either an ATM card or a credit card in some fashion today. Well, for a large part, you're already using banking. You're using individually, we're all using the cloud to basically store our information. And for a large part, we should not be afraid of the cloud in that we're already using it in other facets of our own personal lives as well as the business. The cloud is built with government compliance and with other compliance, so it is supported technology for the different areas that we might have to sort of make within security. One of the other major things is a belief of, people not really wanting to make change. So one of the big things it allows us to do is sort of to start to organize our data with what makes logical sense for the company, for your firm, what makes logical sense for your staff, either the way they're working today and not having to make necessarily changes that they're going to be forced into. So as we start to take a deeper look again at the types of data that we have, we can start to move through how to organize this data in different fashions. So Annalise, if we just want to proceed, please. And continue, exactly. We start to look at some of the data, what's common types of data, and then we can start to reorganize this data. Annalise, if you want to continue through, we will start to sort of see and sort of maybe simplify some of the data that we have, and then we can even continue from here to reorganize this data as part of our analysis and discovery. You can start to see maybe it makes sense to sort of group this building type of data for project teams here. Maybe we take our laser scans and point clouds, which they're only using maybe for reference after the fact. We don't need to continuously back that data up. We can start to maybe reorganize our data based on what makes sense for the firm. This is one of the big things, and this is why I say it's important for anyone to take a deep dive into the analysis and discovery of the types of data that you have. How are people working with that? What are the common file types that you have? What are the big pain points that you have? Are you backing up the same files over and over again? Where are you storing those backups? Do people have access individually to be able to go back and pull those sort of snapshots back? Is that part of the technology that you're using today for your storage? One of the things I always say is sort of a disclaimer anytime I'm talking to storage, maybe engineers, is I have more data today than I did yesterday, and today and tomorrow I'm going to have even more. It just keeps on growing. In fact, I often joke sometimes too. It's whenever I find a staff member gets like either a new digital camera or the new new latest iPhone or other smartphone that sort of takes the highest, latest megapixels, they will go out and take as many site photos and videos that they can at the highest megapixels possible, because they never know when they're going to need to downsize those, or if they're never going to actually plan on downsizing them, they're always going to stay large. So it becomes they have this habit of going in and just taking as much big data, big pictures, and sort of capturing as much information as they can and throw it back on the server and just say, here, it's for you to worry about backing it up, archiving, and dealing with it. So it just becomes this exponential growth of data. So one of the big things is, as we start to look at this, is we say we really need to simplify things into what makes sense for your organization. Do you want to deal with the constant moving of information, and sort of how is your IT group going to operate with this? So one of the big things is you start to analyze and look at how these different storage vendors work with the cloud, is that you do have a lot of different options. You have a lot of options with how you're going to store your data with, as I said, with what makes sense for your organization, but you have a lot of choice too in the different types of partners and vendors that maybe you're going to work with the cloud. And that was one of the exciting things I found about Panzura, is that it worked with a lot of the big name cloud providers that we have trust and faith in. Microsoft, using Azure, or using Amazon's AWS cloud services, and even maybe other private cloud services. That there's a lot of different options that exist exist that are very economical, but good performance and very secure and reliable. And those are some of the important things to us. So as we start to even further go forward and start to look at, after you've performed this sort of analysis and discovery of your own data, and Elisa, if you just want to proceed on, we can start to restructure this new data, or the data that we have in the cloud file system. And you can sort of make sense, again, for what your organization's preference would be. Does it make sense to store it by city? Maybe you're no longer going to actually look at your data by city and say, you know what, we're going to look at our organization as one firm, and we're going to have one place for all of our project data to go to. And with that, we're also going to take all of our corporate data too, and maybe do a similar thing where, you know, maybe our marketing group is spread across a couple of cities, but we don't want them to operate like that anymore. Or maybe even now you're at the point where you have local workers. You know, maybe you have teams that are either working in separate locations or out of their homes at certain times. So you want everyone, say, in marketing to go to one location, or accounting. And now you also have a uniform system across all of those different storage groups for doing your archive backup as being handled by the cloud providers themselves. And so those record copies, you need snapshots and milestones to go back, you know, either months, weeks, or going back into years. You can do that with this. So it sort of helps with a lot of those IT operational challenges that we've been previously faced with. I don't need to necessarily deal with any types of you know, tape backups and other things that have sort of been eliminated as part of this. So moving on from the cloud file system, some of the big benefits and things that we've been able to see, and sort of makes me also look at, you know, how would I have done things different in maybe some of my past projects, and also enables me to think, hey, how am I going to handle my data and structures going forward in new projects? So the cloud file system has enabled us to sort of think about this. And one of the first things I looked at is a couple of the past projects that I had worked on with the firm, and I had a great challenge. We did this one complex art museum that we're working on that had a number of permitting and historical preservation aspects of it. We had a remote office with about 10 people set up out there. So it became the sort of split juggling of trying to get the people to move between, you know, our primary location to then move some of their data out to the other location during production, during construction. And what we saw is about a 10-year time frame from the sort of permitting design phases through actual final completion of construction. We saw over a terabyte of data that was produced, and one of the things I did note from it was about 235,000 email messages that were generated on this. So it became a big complex project for us, in which, you know, we had to sort of replicate additional infrastructure on the server side. We needed complex maybe VPN tunnels to sort of handle this. We needed to back up that data while it was in there. We had to juggle data, move data around, and as it continuously grew, we never knew how much we were going to finally end up in the end. Another one was another project example. We were working as a university laboratory space, and we were sort of we were the associate architect, so we were the prime or the lead on it, but we were working with a local architect of record. So they were familiar with the exterior portions of the building, and we were doing a lot of the interiors as well as affecting that exterior design as well. That became another location in which, okay, how do we separate this? We're working with a remote team. We need complex VPN tunnels. We need hardware accelerators. This becomes a number of challenges for us. You know, what is the best way for sort of us to accomplish this? And how do we share that information back with the central office? These are a number of the challenges that aren't necessarily unique to my firm. A lot of firms see these, or they see them across their entire organization with maybe their multiple offices that they're running today. So these are a number of the things that sort of maybe suddenly change the way we're working and the way we're organizing this data. One of the big things that I say, I went down the path of looking at Panzura and other storage providers at the time, was I started looking specifically for products that necessarily wasn't based around the cloud sharing around that, but it was the how can I store my information better? How can I not have to worry about the backup and the archiving of that data better? And as data was growing, how can I deal with those numbers that are growing, and how can I sort of keep juggling it from bucket of expensive storage over to another bucket of expensive storage and keep going through this constant upgrade process? These were the challenges that I was being faced with, and some of my primary goals. The other thing is, as data becomes stale, or inactive in a particular project, I want the user not to change the way they're seeing the data. I want them to still be able to index it with the applications that they're currently using for project management. I want them to be able to find things in there and treat it just as if it was still local and in the same location with them, and they can still interact with it the same. But the cloud storage suddenly enables you to go out, pull back that data, and sort of access and treat it just as if you were there with it the whole time. So moving on from the sort of the cloud file systems of those project examples really started to be a lot of the benefits that I saw with the cloud file system. Annalisa, if you just want to move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the big things that I sort of came across in our solution is, looking for a storage provider that enabled me to reduce the amount of hardware that I was purchasing, reduce the amount of file servers that I was sort of moving around or juggling this data through, centralize all of my data into one storage platform that also had redundancy for its own sake, that it could be mirrored to another device. So it provided me additional backup or additional sort of availability in that sense. Had that cloud-based connectivity for archiving and backup, so it only really needed to keep the current local active data for us. So there started to become a lot of benefits for me in sort of moving down this path. Reduction of the hardware, reduce that amount of distributed data by centralizing everything into one location, also made it extremely easy to increase that data protection. Another major benefit from going to moving towards the cloud storage was the scalable data, the scalable hardware, but the elasticity, the ability for it to sort of know, hey, you've got this current and inactive, but now as the data starts to age and people aren't accessing it, we can move it out to the cloud. We'll wait till they actually need it back and then sort of pull this back. So this was actually another major benefits for us. There was the choice in what flavor, what cloud providers I wanted to go towards. The other major thing that I've started to see is just sort of the IT sort of overall operations and sort of mantra that I've sort of developed is more and more now I'm seeing there's cloud providers out there, whether it's a software as a service, whether it's moving to maybe Microsoft Exchange hosting or email hosting, that there's more and more cloud providers that can do things better than me. They have more of the infrastructure to support, they have the full-time staff to monitor, they have that high nines availability for us. And one of the big things that I found in my experience in doing this is I could baby step into it. I didn't necessarily have to say, hey, as making my journey into the cloud, I don't have to sit there and throw all of my data at once. Although I found out afterwards I could have, but is it any type of project when you start to, you have a lot of sensitivity about your data, you don't want to get calls, you don't want people complaining about changes, so you're able to actually keep the existing infrastructure, the existing look and appearance of that data. You could reorganize it if you wish based on what makes sense to your organization. It really enabled us to sort of keep the data presented to our end users the way they see it today. We were able to then migrate, I think when I first started going down the path, it was about 10 terabytes of archive data. We moved in about 5 days, and I was extremely impressed with the performance that I was getting. And then currently to say we have about 16 to 17 terabytes of total data now moved off into the cloud, and for the end users it was a very seamless experience. They basically logged on to a new drive and they were seeing everything as if they had always had been there. Permissions were respected that we had set up for previous groups and individuals, so there was no change, and that was one of the most important things I think for sort of our experience was being able to move everything into the cloud and have virtually no change experience for the users other than they know they could get to their data, they could get to it now. And for us, it's a lot simplified IT management of that data in dealing with it sort of in an existing moving on state, backups, archive, deduplication. It's taking care of any duplications of data in there. So it's been a lot of good benefits for us. So from that, I just want to wrap up, and hopefully, that's sort of my story or my journey to the cloud. I know it's not an overly glamorous thing sometimes when you're talking about data. and it's just a lot of big numbers to people and sometimes a little bit of a headache, but I thought it was exciting for us to actually go down that. And sometimes in those the IT world, you get those little bits of things that you're just like, you really get excited or passionate about afterwards, and this was one thing for me. I was like, wow, I really wish I found this product sooner, and I was really happy after I made the migration. It really made life easier for me and my staff.
Dan, I don't know, I disagree with you. I think it was very glamorous. It was really an excellent presentation, an excellent presentation on the rationale behind it and how it's working for you, and I think hopefully everybody here appreciates it, and I certainly do. Let me proceed before we run out of time to the next presenter. The main deep dive that you will see in a few minutes will be done by Greg Westner from Panzura. Before introducing Greg, I'm going to actually introduce Flavio Santoni. Flavio is the Chief Revenue Officer of Panzura. He joined the company about a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. He's responsible for all revenue-generating functions of the company: sales, strategic, partnership, alliances, and ultimately relationships that we have with you, our customers. Has over 25 years of executive-level management experience within the high-tech industry. Flavio, it's a pleasure to introduce you. We are delighted you're able to join us and say a few words about Panzura, and then pass it to Greg.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you, Dan, for being a great ambassador of our technology and sharing with the team here your experience with us. Very much appreciated. And thank you, Emilio, and to the Microsol team for hosting this webinar and giving us the opportunity to share what we do. Just a 1-minute introduction on Panzura. We've been around for around 8 years, and we set out to basically enable customers to leverage, seamlessly the power of the cloud. As I think that everybody sees more and more today that how they can redefine the economics of their infrastructure, and also how they can gain tremendous business agility by leveraging the cloud. So that's where we started off 8 years ago. We were probably early at the time, but we learned a tremendous amount in our journey here. Actually 3 years ago, the company started to focus on 2.5 years ago maybe, the company started to focus on the AEC space. We found actually the spark came from a customer actually in Syracuse, New York, a company called CNS Companies, and basically they had been looking for a very long time on how to solve the fundamental problem on how to collaborate on a global scale in very, very efficiently and drive not only the better end user productivity, but also how to kind of save money by leveraging the cloud. And they actually are the ones that kind of showed us the significant problem that there was in the AEC space. And since then, we spent a lot of time optimizing our technology with the applications that run in the AEC space, Revit and AutoCAD and Civil 3D. All of these applications now we master, I would say, pretty well. And today we have hundreds and hundreds of customers that use our technology, and we see that customers, clearly as they collaborate, they have offices all around the globe, and so our platforms actually are deployed today in around 40 countries in the world. So it's been an incredible journey. Again, on one side leveraging the cloud, but on the other side now bringing a new level of value to the AEC space. You see here the 1990. The 1990 is a kind of brings in context, the savings that we want to bring from a storage standpoint. Then talked about a lot of this data deluge that kind of there is growth of data is everywhere, but it's not just the growth of sheer data, it's also all of the unnecessary copies that sometimes IT need to create to be able to serve the data timely to their constituencies. And so on one side, we want to dramatically reduce that data structures, and at the same time, the 90% on the right, how do we increase the performance, on how the end users can collaborate on a global space. Those are the two things that we try to do. Annalise, if you can move to the next to the next. And so when we think about this, the 5 values that we talk with customers all the time. Number one, how we dramatically redefine the productivity capabilities that the customers that want to collaborate on a global scale can achieve by using our technology. Greg, that follows me here in a couple of minutes, will talk about the magic on how we enable customers really to collaborate across the globe as if they were all in the same office. That's the level of performance we are trying to drive. That people don't think that they're, operating at thousands and thousands of miles apart. They get the same level of performance. At the same time, we bring significant IT simplification to the infrastructure. I think that Dan actually touched on many of these things. Whether we can collapse servers, we can collapse storage, we can collapse WAN optimization devices, whether we integrate backup, whether we integrate disaster recovery, and on top of it, how we simplify the data structures that customers have, whether it is for the hot data, whether it is for the backup data, whether it is for archive. So a dramatic simplification of the IT infrastructure brings significant operational efficiency to IT organizations. And all of this clearly translates in significant cost savings. Today we have cost savings that we bring on clearly, saving on pure infrastructure cost because we collapse a lot of things, but there is also a lot of cost savings because now customers are able to extract significant more productivity from their resources. And so we have seen customers that can end up billing more, being able to bill more hours for their engineering capacity, or the converse is they've been able to bid on projects at lower prices because they had greater productivity. So there is a competitive aspect there as well. So savings comes in multiple ways. The other thing that has become very important is the element of resiliency. Many companies that we've been had the opportunity to work with in the AEC space, we found that in many cases they still use tape as a backup infrastructure. But clearly, if you take a backup at night, if something happens, as you try to recover, you are 1 day behind on your data. Today, our systems integrate a very sophisticated snapshot technology where customers may snapshot their data every minute or most generally maybe once an hour. So your recovery points are so much closer, and therefore you lose less time and data if you were to encounter some issues. The other pieces that we've encountered in the AEC space is the fact that many customers did not have a very clear and efficient disaster recovery implementation, because on one side, disaster recovery implementations are usually very expensive, and they're very cumbersome sometimes to operate. Today, we bring a tremendous simplicity on the disaster recovery capabilities that are integrated with our solution. Last but not least is business agility. Business agility comes from the elasticity of the cloud. Elasticity for us is we provide customers the ability to put not just their data in the cloud, but also put their compute in the cloud. Therefore, creating almost a pathways of customers that think about they want to start with the cloud today, just moving data, but over time they may want to have their own data center running in the cloud. And we offer those capabilities. And the other part of business agility is really related to the fact that what we found is that given the barriers of being able to collaborate, we have customers that, can someone mute please, thank you. Customers, had to put people next to where the projects were because they could not collaborate on a global basis. Today, with our technology, customers can place people wherever they find those resources, and therefore gives them a significant business and agility that they never had before. We also see that in the AEC space there is a lot of consolidation. There are significant merger and acquisitions going on, and so customers get the benefit that when they are on a Panzura platform, if they do an acquisition of someone, bringing them onto the same platform is incredibly easier than it has ever been before. So there are significant values. Clearly, maybe not all customers may get all of the benefits, but there are significant value here that our customers are able to realize. So if we go to the next slide, I think that it's interesting that what Dan was talking about, the challenge that he was faced with before, and the fact that traditional solutions create islands of storage. And so this creates significant challenges for the IT organizations to really serve the data for the projects, for the engineers that need to work every day. They need to scramble underneath to move the data around all the time. And that becomes clearly problematic. Many duplicate copies get created. You need to keep track of the revisions and so on and so forth. And so it's a tremendous amount of work. And the way that Panzura does it, we basically store, and Greg will give you a little bit more details, but we basically put our appliances, which, by the way, could be hardware appliances or can be software appliances. We run in a VM environment as well. But basically, we store the hot data at the edges, and we leverage the cloud. Emilio talked about, and I think Dan talked about as well today, we support, the best cloud solutions out there, whether it is, the Amazon and Azure and Google. And we also support, IBM CleverSafe private cloud. We support EMC private cloud. We support AT&T from a private cloud standpoint. So we give customers options. And by the way, we also saw that we had customers that started off with one cloud provider, but they wanted to move to another cloud provider, and we actually help them through services to migrate from one cloud to the other, so that they don't feel that there is any lock-in, when they start with one cloud, that they need to stay with that one forever. But the idea here is that we now are able, in a very efficient and transparent manner, to leverage the power of the cloud to really give customers that productivity and redefinition of the economics that is now really, real. And we can demonstrate with, as I said, hundreds of customers that are available, that we've been able to serve over the last couple of years. So with that, I wanted to introduce Greg Wesner. Greg has been with us for a few years now. He has significant experience in the AEC space. We're working with Autodesk in software development and architecture, so he's really our top resident expert, in the AEC space. So he's going to walk you through the magic on how we enable some of the things that we've been talking about. With that, Greg, we are moving on to the English side of the presentation here.
Thank you, Flavio. So what I'm going to do is try to discuss how we do in a manner without technical terms. So my goal would be to give you an idea of what we're doing on that to make all this work, so you have some confidence, some understanding of just exactly what it is we're doing. Up till now, you've had kind of a pretty high-level explanation. I'm going to try and give you a little bit more detailed explanation, but also not make it so detailed that Dan Gallivan is the only person in the call that understands me. So if we go to the next slide real quick. When you're talking about working across the wide area network, the problem isn't really working across a network that goes outside of your building, and it's not really the amount of bandwidth. It used to be all about bandwidth, and when we all had DSL, it was a pretty limited amount of bandwidth. It seemed like a lot, but it was when you started to really stuff a lot of data across that, it became limited, and then bandwidth grew, and now 10, 15 megabit bandwidth is not a problem, and so people started to wonder why their WAN accelerators were not working well when their bandwidth was just huge and it should be able to stuff all this data across the web. And the real problem comes down to how far you're going from one point to another. That's called latency. So the two terms I want you to understand in my discussion are bandwidth and latency. Bandwidth, if you imagine a pipe that's carrying, say, water through it, the amount of water you can stuff down that pipe at any given minute, it really has to do with the diameter of that pipe. And that's really what we determine, we call bandwidth. The other aspect of that is how long is that pipe? Because no matter how much you stuff through at once, it's going to take a certain amount to go from one end of the pipe to the other. And in terms of working with the internet and data, you can't accelerate that amount, that time it takes to get from one point to the other beyond the speed of light. And so even going from, we usually talk about latency in terms of milliseconds, and even going from somewhere in California to somewhere like Chicago, you've got about 40 milliseconds there. And going from coast to coast, you're somewhere around 80 milliseconds. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot. It sounds like a very little amount, but you'll see in the next slide here, if we could go to the next slide, just how that adds up. Because if you look at something, one of the first things we started to look at was how long it took to open a file. And this is one of the things our customers originally that from AEC that started to come to us said, it takes forever to open even a small CAD file. And how come it takes so long? I could make this a 1.5 megabyte CAD file and bump it up to 3 megabytes, and it really doesn't make any difference at all. And the reason is because when you're working on a Windows platform, Windows was built to work around a local area network. It does thousands and thousands of calls to figure out if it can open this file, does it have permission, does the file exist, and then there are hundreds and thousands of files to go along with that, even the ones you don't see, but some CAD systems will even show you how many different files it has to open, like fonts, textures, things like that. So all of that adds up, and what happens is it takes 22 minutes to open a file, but it's really important here is that bottom line that says read data packets is 1.44 minutes. That's the actual data in the file. It only took 1 minute and 44 seconds to actually read the data out of the file. The other 20 minutes plus is doing all these thousands of calls, and your typical WAN accelerator cannot accelerate those thousands of calls. It still has to check if that file exists. It still has to make sure you have permission to read that file, things like that. So if we go to the next file, what we did is we accelerate, I'm sorry, you go to the next slide. What we did is accelerate that communication between Windows and us. And all of those thousands of calls get translated across the local area network, and so then we make a select few calls because we are built from the ground up to work across a wide area network. So we make the minimal amount of calls we have to make in order to keep our devices in sync around the world and with the cloud. So by taking out those thousands of calls and making those local area network calls, and only just making a select few calls to make sure we have permission to open the file, we can reduce that time down to something that's much more like what it happens on your local area network, and it takes about 8 seconds to open that same file. So we're going to go to the next slide here, and I'm going to tell you exactly how we do that. It still seems like a little bit of magic, but let's say we have a file system that is 3 locations around the world, and the person in New York there saves a file. What happens is they save that file to our device, our share on the network. You've just mapped the drive to your P drive is now your project's drive. And when they save that file, we are the operating system, so we're able to break that file up into a separation of the actual data that makes up the file and something else we call metadata, which is basically, you can think of that as everything you see in File Explorer when you look at a file. It's the name of the file, it's how many bytes are in the file, it's the time and date stamp that the file is saved, stuff like that. So the first thing our device does when you save a file, every 60 seconds it takes a snapshot of the changes on that drive, and it pushes that metadata up to the cloud. What that means is now the name, the date, and the fact that you saved the file is now transferred up to the cloud, and every 60 seconds it pushes data up there, it also goes and gets the latest change. So it pulls down all the changes that everybody else has made on all the different file systems around the world in their network. So now everybody knows that this file is up to date with the latest change. And then what happens is if somebody, say in London, goes to open that file, Then it goes up and it transfers, the data gets transferred up from New York up as soon as it can. It doesn't happen immediately, but it'll follow after the metadata. This enables us to push that data up there as fast as we can across the amount of bandwidth you have. But then somebody in London goes to open that, and the first thing we need to do is transfer that lock over there. So that lock goes from New York to London. There's only one lock on a file at any given time. So only one person in one location can ever have a file open and have permission to write to it. So they open the file, they get the lock, and then the data will come down, and if we don't have all the data there, we're going to pull the data down. What's significant about this is that we don't do this on a file basis. We do it on a blocks on the drive basis, which means that every file is broken up into many, many blocks. They're usually very small blocks, maybe a megabyte. More like probably around 128K. And every block is on the drive. If there are any blocks that are duplicates, we never write the same block twice. So therefore, we're transferring only the changed block when you, whoever just unmuted their phone, please mute it. Whenever you save a file, you end up... Somebody's got to mute that. Every time you change a file, you're only changing a small percentage of the blocks that make up that file, and we only store the changes. So then those changes is all we pass up to the cloud, and when London needs that file and they need the latest version of that file, chances are they already have a good portion of that file down. We just have to pull the changes that were made. And all of this in a typical file scenario can happen seamlessly behind the scenes. The user doesn't even realize that it took a couple extra seconds to open that file. And there's no interaction on the user part. It happens all in the background. It's transparent. So if we go to the next slide. So now you're wondering probably about Revit, because Revit is big in the AEC space. And it has parallels with other applications like Civil 3D and things like that. But Revit's are one of our biggest claims to fame, because we can work seamlessly with Revit with multiple people in multiple locations working on the same file at the same time. And the way this happens is that Revit will store what it calls a central model on the central server. And when you're working on it, you actually get a copy of that central model down on your desktop. And that's what you're working on. But while you're working, you're moving things around and doing things, and it's making subtle changes to files on the central server in what's called the backup folder. And so every time you move an element, it's writing a small amount of data to that backup folder, which is, you know, user A has this element borrowed and nobody else can touch this element. And when other people in other locations go and edit that same file and borrow other elements, that same file has to be backed up. But because of our technology, what we do in that case, we don't want to wait till that file gets pushed up to the cloud, those changes are read into the cloud, and then another location goes and reads that data from the cloud. Even that would be too slow. As fast as we do that, that would be too slow to really support usable work in Revit. So what we do is we recognize people that have the same file open simultaneously, and we proactively transfer these files just between those locations that have that file open, so that all of the changes in these backup folders, they're very small amounts of data, remember, they're just one line here, one line there. Those changes get transferred from site to site very quickly, and it enables Revit to work in multiple locations simultaneously. So if we go to the next slide, it's kind of the same slide I showed you before, but the difference here is that when somebody in London works with this file in Revit, we don't bother pushing the actual data that's being changed in that backup folder at real time, happening all the time consistently. We don't push that up to the cloud and back down to a device. We're able to connect between our devices in each location across the web, and we will just send those changes around to the other devices that have that file open. And that's really what sets us apart from just about anybody else in the space, is our ability to support applications that allow you to work simultaneously on a file at the same time. So the other thing that's really important is the data when it's pushed up to the cloud is compressed, it's deduped, what I mentioned about just saving it to blocks and only writing the same block once, and then it's encrypted. And that encryption is a FIPS level of encryption. So if you work on government projects, things like that, many of our customers are government agencies that need a high level of encryption, including the several Department of Defense agencies and the Department of Justice all use us. So you can imagine that's a high level of encryption. It's completely secure. And it gets pushed, it gets deduped, compressed, and encrypted, and then pushed up to the cloud. So if we go back to the next slide, so we're able to do all of this. We're able to reduce things like sync time, syncing with Central, saving a file, because those things are happening locally across your local area network to our device. And then we're pushing the data up to the cloud for continuous data protection. And as Flavio said, you know, we take a snapshot of that device every 60 seconds and we push that up to the cloud. So every 60 seconds you're getting a backup. And so the latest version of every file is backed up in the cloud where it's secure and safe. And so you'd be hard pressed to get a file in there and edited and then lost without us having a backup of it. And so if we move on to the next slide, I think, so we're 90% faster, 90% less storage, because we only store, our devices are only built to store what data is hot at the time. So we're not storing, if you have 10 terabytes in the cloud, chances are any given office is using 1 to 2 terabytes of data. And so we're only storing that data down locally. The device only has to be big enough to support that data that you're working on continuously there in that office. So we can reduce the size of the storage you have in each location and still support your whole file system being represented on that device at any given time. You go through Explorer, every file that you've ever worked on is there in the file system, and you can go and access it when you need to. And if we haven't accessed it lately, we just go and pull just what we need from the cloud to build that file back up for you.
On behalf of Panzura and also on behalf of Payette and Microsol Resources, we wanted to thank you very much for joining us today. And Flavio and Greg and Dan, thank you very much.